during some of the signaling pieces. So. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you to the team for a great presentation. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the things that have been said tonight. I guess I want to just echo a couple of things that Mrs. Tossan said, that we are very happy about the no F-rated campuses. That helps in our political conversation, and as we approach legislatures, to be able to talk to them about this system and how it's a very labeling and demeaning system. It helps us to be able to have high-performing campuses, because it's not that we're trying to get rid of something, or get rid of the label for us. It's that we really don't believe this is reflective of what our campuses are doing. So we appreciate that that milestone, and know that it took a lot of work by a lot of people to get us to that point. So I just wanted to say that. I also want to pick up on another thing she talked about, and that is related to achievement gaps that show up quite like on slide 21. The high percentages of kids that are either not passing or are only approaching grade level in the African American groups and the Hispanic groups it's concerning as we look at the statistics overall. I guess one of the questions that I wondered is, when we break down this data, do we see any changes in the trend as the kids age? In other words, we've talked in this boardroom before that when the kids are younger and maybe they've had less advantage going into, and maybe we could look at the economically disadvantaged, the trend is the same there. As they're younger and they're going into a system where they've maybe not had a lot of preschool or whatever it might be, do we see any change in the trend, in the gap, if you will, as the kids matriculate or later in their educational experience in Fort Bend ISD?
So I think one thing in response to that the scatter plots demonstrate with the statistical significance at middle school and high school is that probably the gaps do get wider without appropriate intervention or an appropriate foundation. However, that is something that the curriculum is working to intervene for, and we've certainly seen excellent results with what's happening at ELC, the Early Literacy Center so far. To examine what you're asking to do, we would want to do more of a cohort analysis and see how a given group of students is doing as they move across grade levels, and then ask some questions about what trends there are and why is that trend in existence. We
right.
have started to do that with the EDGE campuses, but that's something we could expand out from.
Okay. Well, maybe that would be a good thing to look at, and I guess as my colleagues were saying, looking at this data, looking at data every which way is probably the best way to understand what it can tell us. I'd just like to also make a comment about the slide 9 and the community-based accountability system. I noticed that, well, I appreciated this slide because it talks about, as you said, the developmental stages and the stages we're going through. I wanted to say a big thank you to the campuses who volunteered to be the pilot campuses, because I can tell you from being on the design team that we were flying the airplane and building it at the same time. And those campuses really stepped out, and the leaders stepped out to, kind of in a step of faith to say, all right, well, we'll give this a try. And one of the things I know I said to the group is, trust us, we're not going to beat you up on it, but we do want you to give it a try so we can understand better how the system works and what tweaks need to be made in the signaling and all that's involved. So I just want to recognize that they're real pioneers to do this. I think that's the word you used, and that's really, they said yes to something and they had no idea what they were saying yes to. So that's leadership right there. And the other thing on this slide, in the last phrase there, talking about supporting the work of the students, teachers, and parents, I think I heard you say and maybe it was Mrs. Williams who said something about when you're recognizing or seeing something in a campus walkthrough, or I'm assuming also this would apply through the signaling process in a community-based accountability, there's a fairly rapid response to that. Is that true? And do the principals know how to access that, or teachers, or?
Yes,
Grade
we're trying to work that support through the campus support team so they have a point of contact for whatever support they might need. And we're in the follow-up memos that we work with them on. We help them know how they can request that support and then who would be out there to do that.
Okay, and then picking up on something I think that Mr. Rosenthal was, we want to not have a gotcha type environment. So how do we make sure that even if we haven't noticed, even if y'all haven't noticed in a walkthrough, how do principals and staff know how to get help when they recognize they're sinking in whatever situation, or they need help?
Well, I think that comes through the day-to-day relationships that we have with them. They know what each department is kind of charged with helping them with, and we would want them to reach out to a leader. But if we're there and we notice something, we go directly to the leader and say, hey, have you thought about this? How can we help? So it's kind of a partnership that we've agreed upon in order to ensure that they're getting the support that they need for professional learning or either in the classroom.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mrs. Helliger.
Good evening. Thank you again for your presentation. I'm really excited that where we are as a district, and so good job, Dr. Dupree and staff and everyone. I do want to ask some questions, and something that we've had conversations with here before in the boardroom. So maybe this is a bit of a question/challenge, to us as boards in the district on how we look at this data. And I'm going to piggyback on something that Ms. Tossan and Ms. James stated. I'm going to focus on page 21 of your slide deck. And so when I look at and I think about the diversity that's in our district, and I don't have the numbers offhand, but when I think about the ethnic groups and where they are when it comes to the percentage of students in our district, right? If I remember correctly, the last one I saw, and you all can correct me, nobody shoot me, but I know the white and Asian population was a smaller group versus the, Asian's the biggest, and then African American is large, right? So it's Asian, African American, and Hispanic was pretty large as well, right? If I remember correctly, right? And so when I look at the numbers, I think the numbers are they're disparate, with performance. And so then I also think about culture norms, and how do we use culture norms to help change the performance in some of these ethnic groups? Because as we move holistically as a district, the African American and Hispanic numbers specifically, I mean, we made some progress, but there has not been a major progress there, right? And the Asian, and there was a 3-point jump in the Asian population in the masters from 2018 to 2019, and it was kind of stayed the same in the Caucasian area, but for an African American Hispanics, they really still pretty low in that 25-point jump. So I'm thinking that we're missing something in the sense of how we look at maybe, not necessarily the data, but the content on how we approach things. And I think we have to, if we say we want to, as a board, want to move these numbers, what are we gonna do different to focus on these particular areas, right? And I know we can look at it, if I could, I think somebody asked a question about like where these students are or whatnot. And I'm sure if we go back and look at one of those scattergrams and look and see what percentage of those schools are, most of it is probably condensed in certain areas, in certain schools, whatnot. Larger numbers, how about that? Okay, larger numbers are condensed in certain schools. So then, what, from an innovative perspective, are we doing to challenge the way we look at how we approach the cultures, not necessarily the schools, the cultures at those, in these areas. Okay. So, I mean, that's my perspective, because when I see it, I'm like, why is it that the Hispanic, because I know everybody's smart and brilliant and talented and gifted, right? I know that, but these numbers don't necessarily reflect that, right? So I'm like, I'm challenged when I look at this to see that, because, and I even look at my own kids, assimilation is one thing that we do as people, right? But then how we actually, even the books. I'm thinking books. I'm thinking what not necessarily what excites them, and those kinds of things could be different. They're different, So if I read one book over here versus a book over here, with some of your basic contents, your basic fundamental things, what would that be? How would that be different in the outcomes of learning for these kids if it's more culturally based? I mean, just trying to tie, some of those things together, because apparently there's something there, and I don't know what it is, but that's where I'm going with that.
Well, I'll speak to that, and I'll tell you, we feel equally challenged,
Mhm.
but I will also tell you what is there is years of not taking care of business. And so what you're seeing when you see this orange in the African American Hispanic go from 29 to 28 to 27, that represents thousands of students. It's only 1 percentage point a year, but with the population being as large as it is in those two groups, it's thousands of students. And so I think you're absolutely on the right track in terms of we've got to continually look at the culture, and we are doing that. But what we're doing, I think that's really driving this change initially, is we've been very intentional about following research-based practices with our curriculum, with instruction, the way we deliver instruction. That's why we're seeing the gains that we're seeing. But we're also consistently having conversations about culturally relevant instruction, and not just with the content and the books they read and those things, but how we engage with students and the different cultures that students come from, and the significance of teachers who are able to engage with many different types of students. So we're constantly having those conversations, because you often hear of some of the things that happen in our schools. Even, last week, a teacher harming, or the aide harming a special needs student. I mean, many teachers need that coaching and development because they're frankly not coming out of college prepared to deal with the diverse student populations we have. So we're having to do a lot of training and embedding of mindset in our teachers. Now, don't get me wrong, we have many, many teachers who are doing it and doing it very well. That's why when you look at these charts, you see schools like Ridgegate Elementary really doing well. I mean, we've got a lot of our schools that were perceivably highest risk, where they are delivering academically for those students. But having been in those schools, and others may speak to this, what I see when I go there is they're using strategies like capturing kids' hearts, where they're determined. They love on the kids, they greet the kids, they ask the child, "You seem a little different today. What's going on? Can I help you?" And we just have to get to a place where we have that consistently happening in every building and every classroom. And that's truly the journey we're on. So you're absolutely on the right path of acknowledging those cultural pieces. And I agree with you 100%. Kids need to read books that they can relate to, that feel like, and those things, all of those things are a big part of this. And that's really what we're trying to capture in the new curriculum and the instructional practices. But like you said, the cultural piece, how we capture that kid and bring them to the learning and engage them, is really where the difference is made.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't want to make sure I don't, focus on the books, but I understand exactly what you're saying. Yeah. And so, and I guess too, also what challenge, based on what you just said, what I also heard you say is that, we're trending with the state, right? So if we're trending with the state, but I don't want to trend with the state. And that's the part where I'm like, okay, so they got me really the brain to churn around the cultural piece. And so we've got to be, extremely intentional, and maybe we need to put some goals around that, you know, and so that we can measure and really say, this is what we want to do, and you know, from as a district when it comes to these areas.
I agree, and I think we're on that. I think the community-based accountability system is going to drive toward that more, because we're going to get the right questions, and that's what these hopes and dreams conferences are helping us to achieve. There's just so much of the good work we're doing that is really driving us in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mrs. James?
Sorry, I have one more question that you reminded me when you said about the hopes and dreams meetings. So are those, I heard you say 10 people, so are these by invitation only, or is this open to the community, or how is that working?
So what we've
someone
asked
asked me.
principals to do is to specifically make sure they've got at least 10 representatives. They can have more than that. They can send out general information to invite people, but to at least make sure that there are 10 representatives or so, it's about 10, from each campus to be representative of parents. So for example, elementaries, we asked them to have at least 3 parents there, and to have a community member, and to have some staff members there. At the secondary, we asked for more. We asked for 5 parents at least to be there, and a couple of students at least to be there. And then in addition to who they're inviting with students, we've also invited the Leadership 101, 102, and Voices students to come participate in those forums. So the goal is not to be exclusive. The goal is to ensure a certain amount of representation that is representative of the different stakeholder groups, and to engage them in we have about 3 rounds of conversation around the question, what are your hopes and dreams for your children? And then we prioritize for each stakeholder group and overall. So they're very specific to the feeder pattern, but at least that much representation from every campus in that feeder pattern.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to say I wanted to thank my fellow board members for their questions and comments. I echo just about everything that was said up here this evening. No need to go through that again, but I appreciate the presentation. I know there's a lot of work that goes into it, and thank you for all your hard work. So, next, we will have our internal audit of child nutrition department. If we could keep that under an hour.
This isn't me. This is the board's.
Thank you, Board President Burdine, members of the board, Dr. Dupree. It's my pleasure to be here tonight.
I'd like for Mr. Rice to open this up, if you could, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Mr. Gibson is joining us with Gibson Consulting to present the results of the child nutrition audit, and at the end of which I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions. Take it away, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you. My name is Greg Gibson. I'm president of Gibson Consulting Group. We serve as the district's internal auditor, and this is our 7th year. And we appreciate being part of your board's initiative for continuous improvement. And tonight I'm going to present the results of the child nutrition audit. Before I start, I would like to thank the members of the child nutrition department for participating and cooperating with this audit. There was a leadership transition, and Strodbeck started the audit, and then Matt filled in later in the audit, and it was absolutely seamless. The audit was very smooth, and we worked really well, and they were very responsive to our needs and gathering the information we needed to conduct the audit, so thank you. Our audit team included Gibson representatives, names that are probably familiar to you, that were involved in project management, data analysis, our lead auditor. But we contracted, as we do on some of our audits, with a firm that has particular expertise in the topical area, and in this case it was Tennell Consulting. And Robin Tennell is phenomenal. She is one of the top, I would say, 2 or 3 nutrition services consultants in the United States. And she has been working with our firm for several years now and we are fortunate to have her participate on this audit. The objectives of this audit are similar to our other audits: effectiveness, efficiency, compliance. On page 2 of the report, there are 10 questions that are very specific to the nutrition services function, questions that we were addressing as part of the audit. I won't go through each of those. The scope of the audit and the organization of the report is broken down into 3 major areas: organization and management, financial management, and operations and staffing. Our audit approach, like many of our audits, is very data intensive. As your child nutrition department staff can attest to in collecting all this information for us. And we reviewed that information before we came on site, conducted a site visit, and conducted central office interviews, as well as visited 18 schools. I was fortunate enough to be able to visit one of those schools myself. Our team observed over 3,000 students eating lunch and 1,000 students eating breakfast at these 18 schools. We also conducted central office and school focus groups to collect and corroborate additional information. We also conducted audit testing in the areas of food production, records, edit checks or data verification, and employee site assignments. And these results are reflected also in the report. And we developed findings and recommendations and developed this final report. And throughout the report, you'll see references to CND and SNP. And CND is the Child Nutrition Department, and we specifically reference the department in many instances. And in other instances, we talk about the SNP, which is the Student Nutrition Program. And so I just wanted to delineate those as you read the report, because they are not one and the same. But the program is a more generic term. Before I get into the commendations, I just wanted to put in context the food service operation. We serve over 35,000 meals today, every day, over 28,000 lunches per day, and 739 employees comprise this department, and it's a $26 million a year operating budget. This is a large, major, an important program. We show early in the report that food is important for feeding the brains of our students before and during school, so that they work better and can learn more and achieve the results that were just described to you earlier. So nutrition services is a very important element of a school system's academic programs. There were several commendations we noted. This unit has made some improvements in recent years, and we wanted to acknowledge those. The human resource management and staffing efficiency at the school level has improved. Financial performance of the child nutrition department has improved. Communication, the formalizing of that communication has improved. And asset tracking and replacement planning has improved. So we wanted to note that these, notwithstanding our findings and recommendations to further improve, we did want to acknowledge the CND's improvement efforts thus far. There are some major findings I wanted to go through before we talk about the specific recommendations. One is the lack of key performance indicators, and this is a finding that we have found in other audits, and this was found also in this particular audit. And key performance indicators are measures of effectiveness, measures of efficiency, sometimes measures of compliance that help leadership hold that department accountable for results. So you just saw what that looked like in student achievement. Every department can have similar types of KPIs for their operation, and so we've recommended in the report KPIs that are very specific to the nutrition service operation. While the financial performance has improved in the school nutrition and the child nutrition department, we still have losses. We're not at a net loss. Our fund balances are positive. They're at reasonable levels. And so we are not in the hole in our nutrition services area at all. But our financial performance is such that we are not achieving our break even that we need to achieve. Some of this is due to staffing inefficiencies. While we've improved, there still is a ways to go. There are wide variations in staffing efficiency among schools. There are wide variations in meal participation rates across schools. Some of those can be explained. Some of those need to be addressed. We do not cost in detail our menu items, so it doesn't provide us the information that we need to do really robust financial analysis that can help us perhaps reduce those costs without sacrificing food quality. And we also noted there was a lack of school-level financial analysis. Every school should have a profit and loss statement for their food service operation. And if you do that, you're able to pinpoint which schools are contributing, which schools are not contributing. Again, the goal is to not make money. The goal is to break even, but you need to identify your schools which are bringing the average down. So those areas all contributed to financial performance that still needs to be improved. Another major finding in this audit was that the district, like many districts, it's not unique to Fort Bend ISD, is not participating in what's called the CEP, the Community Eligibility Provision. This is a program by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's a relatively new program. You have 30 schools that are eligible to participate in this program, and it basically allows the entire school to be served free meals. And it does so without having individual families have to apply for eligibility. The school or the community is eligible if it meets certain criteria. So it's a really good program. The schools that have, school districts that have implemented that have seen the benefits of increased participation. And so we have a recommendation in this report for you to consider that. Another major finding is actually in process of being fixed as we speak. When we started the audit early in January, February, there was an information system that we found to be outdated, not integrated, not meeting your information needs, and requiring some excessive manual and spreadsheets and other processes which were not efficient. Before our audit was terminated or concluded, the district went out and purchased a new child nutrition information system. And we believe that that's going to address a lot of the inefficiencies and integration issues that we noted during the audit. Several compliance risks were noted in the report. While we noticed improved communications, there were some of the urgent communications about food safety recalls, program compliance. The way these get out to the schools is good. The way they get from the schools to the staff is not always clear, and it's not always consistent. And so we noted that during our site work that when we were visiting the schools, that the communication, the same communication, was really not the same. In many cases, it wasn't clear, and so we wanted to address that. We also noticed some cash controls. We don't handle a lot of cash these days at your schools in the nutrition service operation, but what little cash that we saw transacted, there were some control weaknesses that needed to be addressed. We also noted that the training records management, while you have training records, there was a lot of manual intervention and use of spreadsheets that increased the risk of a compliance issue with the TDA because the training requirements are very specific. The audit recommendations are start on page 20 of the report. I'm not going to go through each of them. Out of the 27 recommendations, 5 are considered high priority, 19 medium, 3 low. Those priority assignments were assigned by us based on our assessment of the priority and importance. The district responses to each recommendation are included in the report. and I believe the district largely agreed with virtually all of our recommendations. And there's only a couple of other recommendations that I really want to mention on subsequent pages before I finish. I mentioned the KPIs, which would also involve the conducting of annual surveys. So that performance information will help round out your key performance indicators for your nutrition service operation. Recommendation number 8 is to track and analyze financial information by school. We discussed the benefits of that. Recommendation 10 is to allocate general fund indirect costs to your nutrition services area. Right now, we are allocating some general fund costs that we incur on their behalf, like electricity, other utilities costs, some custodial costs. And so we are recommending that the district get reimbursed for all of those costs that they incur on the food service department's behalf. We've already talked about the CEP. We have some specific ideas to increase meal participation at some of your schools. Your range in participation in elementary schools goes from 30% to almost 80%. It's a very, very large participation rate. We have some suggestions for how you might be able to increase participation rates at some of those schools. I believe that's all the recommendations I really needed to discuss. I will be available for any questions at this time. And so that concludes my presentation of the Nutrition Services Audit Report.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Mrs. Haliger?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So I have 3 questions. So I don't think it's really toward the district. So what is the reasoning for us not having the 30 schools participate in the CEP?
Well, I'll just speak to that. Historically, it wasn't a priority by the prior administration. Matt got here, and I think he started in July, and he said we need to do this and we need to do it right now. But there are implications for accountability when you do it, because all the students in the school, sometimes they do not complete. There's a kind of a tension point where they all get to eat. But for accountability purposes, we still have to have a count of free and reduced lunch students. So we still need them to fill out the forms. So historically throughout the state where this has occurred, there's been accountability problems, and schools go low performing because the parents think, well, we don't need to fill them out, the kids are already eating. So we asked to delay it for a period of time so we could get that strategy in place to be able to do that. But our plan is to get this going as soon as possible.
Okay.
Because we do agree it is in the best interest of the students.
Okay. And the second question is the variance. I saw something about variance of cost of, is it meals? What is that?
I'm sorry, your question?
You talked about there was different variance of costs for meals across in different schools.
Participation rates. So the meal participation rates, there's also, we have percentages of food costs that we compare to the peer districts. There are 11 peer districts that we compared to. Our food cost as a percentage of the total was actually in the lower end of the peer comparison. But the 2 major things we noticed wide variations were staff productivity and meal participation rates.
Okay. Maybe I understood it wrong. Okay, thank you for that clear up. And so then the last one is the participation. I know you talked about you have some ideas to get the participation rates up from 30 to 80%. Does that include asking the kids?
Yes, I believe the survey is, there's different types of surveys that you can do, and if it's done right, you obviously have to go by the rules if you're going to survey students. But you can ask students and inquire what's important to them in their meals. And so you can also analyze what they eat and be able to identify more popular foods that hopefully are also healthy foods. We also have a recommendation about filling a marketing position, actually marketing your programs. There was a position, but there was no individual in that position during our audit that was responsible for actually promoting the students eating meals at the school, and so are district-wide. So we think there's some basic marketing things that can be done, because what we observed at the schools was that the kitchens and the presentation of the food was great. It wasn't like there was a inclination of students not to eat because of what they saw. So every school that we saw to, the lines were inviting, the food was organized well. We ate the food. It was tasted good. And so some of the participation may be not that kids are not eating, they're bringing their own lunch, or they're going off campus later in the secondary school. In the high schools, they're leaving campus to go eat elsewhere.
Greg, let me interject, because one of the things that and Matt may want to speak to this too, one of the issues we really deal with is our diversity. Because with our significant Asian population, we have many vegetarians and many students who need foods that are halal compliant or even kosher in some cases, but especially halal in this community, and our kitchens have not provided those meals. So one of the tasks we've asked MAC to really get to is to understand what our diverse student body needs. And for us in a district this size, that means some of our schools, we're gonna have to have differentiated menus. You can't have the same thing at every single school. And that's historically been all menus across all schools every day. But we've got to acknowledge that we have pockets of students who may eat at the school if they knew the school was prepared in a way compliant with their faith or their culture. So I think that alone is a big step forward if we get some gains there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mrs. James?
Thank you, Dr. Dupree, for saying that, because that's been a longstanding need in the child nutrition department to have that addressed. And we have gluten-free students, we have vegetarians, we have all these things, and I appreciate you recognizing that. And I think that's a great step forward. I'd also like to pick up on another thing that Ms. Helliger just mentioned, and that is the community eligibility provision, because I've said for a long time we need to feed every child breakfast and lunch so we know they're getting 2 good meals, they're ready to learn in their school. And I really feel like this is and I'll just say one more bit of it is, I think we need to look at summer feeding, because some of our kids need to eat meals and have their school be a center in their community that is safe, inviting, and is helping them to be better learners. So I've said that before, but it seemed like a good opportunity to reiterate that. I have one question additionally on slide 7, and that is the very first bullet there. You talk about a new system that we just purchased, and I'm trying to understand, is this going to address our information management issues or not address it?
Not independent. A system doesn't really solve your data problems, because your data is only as good as the data going into the system. It is going to make you more efficient, but there were 2 or 3 recommendations related to data validation that we noted in the report that will need to be addressed through separate recommendations, and those are in the report.
Okay, so the new system is going to be functional, but it's the data going in and the way we're collecting that data that might create some inefficiencies or errors in.
I mean, some of the information we do not, because this was the new system was purchased after the field work, so we're not aware of all of the interfacing capabilities of the system. If it can reduce spreadsheets, the number of spreadsheets that we use to process information, then you reduce the risk of error. And so we're hopeful that there will be opportunities to interface, and there may be someone in the district more informed about this new system than I am that can maybe explain to you tonight or another night what type of integration can be achieved with this new information system. So the more integration you have, then you're not entering data into multiple systems, and that helps reduce the risk of data errors.
Okay, I see somebody who might be coming to the microphone who might be able to share a little more information.
Yeah, I can try to help answer that question. So we purchased Primero Edge software that was implemented right around July 1st. I've been using that software for 16 years now in previous districts. So a lot of the data that the audit recommends will be much more easily accessible. Meals per labor hour, daily activity reports, meals served per campus. So that data will be available district-wide and by campus. So then we will take that data and run reports along with salaries and pay per campus, so we can kind of find the problem areas. With 80 schools, we know there's going to be a few campuses where we're probably deficient in certain areas, and then there's others that are going to carry us with the sale of additional items or high participation, if you will. So we'll be able to drill down to individual campuses and find out where those problems are.
So just a follow-up question on that. So this software then is point of sale. It's tracking purchasing, food purchasing, reordering, things like all those types of things, right? So that's going to give you that data where it doesn't have to be entered individually. Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much.
And then in January, we'll start menu planning back of the house. So all the meal pricing, menu items will be in that system. Inventory will be done through this system, so we can keep track better of inventory in-house, what we're spending per campus, per meal. So all the data will be there for us.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mr. Rice?
Well, I would just like to make a few concluding comments. And first of all, thank you to Matt Antignolo for coming in halfway through this audit and picking up the ball and helping us complete the audit in a timely fashion. And for those in the audience, you may have heard me say this before, but it does bear repeating. We've, in the last 6 years, completed approximately 18 audits of various departments. And when those audits are complete and the administration has had a chance to respond to all of the recommendations and the questions, then they're presented here at the board, as has been done this evening. Once it's been presented, Mr. Burdine will put it on the agenda to be accepted, and then it is published and becomes part of the public domain. But that's not the end of it. 9 months later, Mr. Gibson will come back and do a follow-up to see how well we are doing in achieving a lot of the recommendations that have been set forth. And that is how we conduct efficiency audits in Fort Bend ISD. And these audits are available to the public, and they show the things that we're doing well, the things we need to improve in, and everything else. And I challenge the county government, the city government, or any other school district in the state of Texas to meet the level of integrity and stick-to-itiveness that we have done over the last 6 years. We have Gibson Consulting who comes in and does this. We've outsourced that work because he is able to bring to bear specialists in the various fields. As he pointed out, the folks involved in child nutrition auditing up front with Rob Tennille Consulting. We can't employ all of these people in the school district, which is why we outsource this work. So I wanted to share that with everybody and make sure that members of the press write that down. We're sharing that with you, and so that's all I have to say. But again, Mr. Gibson, thank you for being here, and we'll look forward to the next audit presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. We will now convene in closed session under the Texas Open Meetings Act, Chapter 551, and those sections listed in the agenda. and for the purpose of private consultation with the board's attorney on any or all subject matters authorized by law. We are now convened in closed session.